some of these small Tootsie Rolls turned in. Inside these Tootsie Rolls have been placed 1.5-inch long sewing needles.
Astonishment. I can't comprehend. I've got a little 4-year-old girl, and it's something that you just can't put into words.
Halloween in one form or another has been around for over 2,000 years. Samhain was a harvest festival that was celebrated by Celtic people in England, Ireland and Scotland. On Samhain, many Celts thought that the borders between the natural world and the supernatural spirit realm dissolved, allowing the dead to wander among the living. This was one of their most important holidays. Through hundreds of years of migration, the melding of traditions and religious practices, and eventually the introduction of a commercial holiday propelled by popular culture and money, Halloween has a life of its own, with its very own myths and urban legends that have grown over the last 100+ years. One of the most prevalent myths is of a creepy wrongdoer that gives out evil tricks under the guise of treats. Apples with razor blades in them, pills disguised as candy, and powdered glass hidden in sherbet. We've all either been warned ourselves, have warned our kids, or are just aware of this urban myth. But what if this wasn't just a myth? What if a trusted member of your community, or even a member of your family, planned the unimaginable and saw it through? This is the very real story of the Candyman. Viewer discretion is advised. Here at Case Documentaries, we release at least one new true crime video every week. I hope that you will join the Dark Case family by subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. And please consider further helping us in our work by supporting us on Patreon. Link is in the description. YouTube channel membership is also available for 99p and would be incredibly appreciated. And if you'd like to tip the channel, super thanks are turned on for this video. Our love and respect goes out to those affected by this case. On Halloween night of 1974 in Deer Park, Texas, local youngsters went door to door to collect candy. It was raining heavily, but trick-or-treaters were out in full force. At the time, Deer Park was a relatively small town with a population of less than 20,000. One of the revelers was an optometrist named Ronald Clark O'Bryan. He was out and about on Halloween, supervising his children, Timothy 8 and Elizabeth 5, as they went door to door collecting candy in a suburban area not too far from their house. The O'Bryan family's next door neighbour, Jim Bates, and his young son also came along for a night of Halloween fun. The group went from house to house collecting candy as they went. Even though one of the houses that the group approached had no lights on, the children continued to pound on the door since the possibility of receiving candy was too alluring to ignore. But there was no response. It was either empty or the inhabitants had gone into hiding. Jim chased after them as they rushed off in search of another house and more candy. This left Ronald by himself. A short while later, when Ronald had finally caught up with the others, he shared some excellent news with them. He presented the children with some pixie sticks, which are a powdered sour candy tube measuring 21 inches in length. Ronald revealed that someone had in fact been in the house the entire time. As the night drew to a close, the party travelled back to their homes. The pixie sticks were distributed as follows: one to each of the children who were there, one to neighbour Jim's other child, and another to a youngster of 10 years old whom Ronald remembered from church. Before going to bed and exhausted from the festivities, Timothy O'Bryan was permitted to select one candy from the evening's collection, and he chose his pixie sticks tube. However, the powdered sugar got trapped in the straw, and it took his father's assistance to free it before Timothy could take his first mouthful. Timothy complained that the pixie sticks had an unpleasant flavour. Ronald then went to get him a glass of Kool-Aid to help mask the unpleasant taste. A little over an hour elapsed, and Timothy was now dead.
Pasadena police are warning parents to check trick-or-treat candy like this and to throw it out if they find anything suspicious. There were children who were neglecting these warnings and as late as last night were still out trick-or-treating. Sandra Feldman, Eyewitness News.
Former Harris County prosecutor Mike Hinton later said, "It was just a coincidence I was working the police intake that night. I got a call from the police department. They told me an 8-year-old boy had died. He was rushed to hospital, but he'd already passed." Dr. Joseph A. Jakimczyk, the chief medical examiner for the neighbouring Harris County, received a phone call from Hinton, who was eager to begin his inquiry. According to Hinton, "I told him the situation and he asked what the young man's breath smelled like. Following a call to the mortuary, it was discovered that the boy's mouth had an almond-like odour emanating from it. It's cyanide," stated Dr. Jakimczyk.
Hours. And cyanide, for example, is the basis for the gas chamber execution license.
The hypothesis of the medical examiner was validated by the results of the autopsy, which revealed that Timothy had taken enough cyanide to kill 2 people. After further testing and investigation, it was discovered that the poison was concentrated in the first 2 inches of the pixie sticks. Officers were able to retrieve the remaining candy from the other youngsters before any of them had a chance to consume it. They also revealed that whoever was responsible for the incident had used staples to reseal the pixie sticks packages after they had been tampered with. That's what saved another boy's life that night, Hinton remembered. They found him in bed with a sweet in his hand, but he wasn't strong enough to undo the staples.
Children will not even eat candy that I bought myself. They had heard rumors that the candy could have come from the store already put in a pack. They will not even trust the candy I have in my own house.
Has there been any suspicion among the neighbors?
None that I have experienced myself. I think, if anything, they had thought the neighbors closer together.
As a result of the incident that occurred here, the mayors of Pasadena and several other nearby towns have been suggesting that there be alternatives to trick-or-treating on Halloween. The parents say they are not willing to accept that. They want Halloween stopped altogether. They say it's simply not worth it. Diana Fallis, Eyewitness News in Pasadena.
The officers brought Ronald back to the area where he and the rest of the party had been trick-or-treating, so that he could point them in the direction of the house from which he had obtained the pixie sticks. But Ronald was stumped. He just couldn't identify the home, and he also claimed that he never actually saw the face of the person responsible. According to Ronald, the door was barely open, and as the candy was passed, only the arm and hand was visible. Investigators began to get suspicious. A few days went by and it was incredibly frustrating, says Hinton. So they took O'Bryan out again and they were pretty firm with him. Hinton's strategy was successful. Ronald's memory was miraculously stimulated as a result. He gestured in the direction of the home. Officers proceeded to the homeowner's place of employment, which was the William P. Hobby Airport in Houston, and arrested him in front of his co-workers. Police had found their man. The investigation was over, apart from one thing. The man had a plausible alibi. According to Hinton, it turned out that he was working that night. His wife and daughter were at home, and because they had no more sweets, they had turned out the lights before it got dark. The man's account was validated by his co-workers and the timesheets that they kept. This only magnified my suspicions, said Hinton. Time passed and Timothy was laid to rest.
8-year-old Timothy O'Bryan was the only child to have eaten any of it, and now friends and family are paying their final respect.
Hinton said, I'd also heard Ronald O'Bryan was angry at his relatives for not staying up the night of Timothy's funeral, which was odd. It turns out that Ronald had written a song about Timothy joining Jesus and the Lord in heaven. Ronald had become agitated when his grieving family wouldn't stay up late to watch a recording of the performance being broadcast on television. Hinton started to believe something very strange was going on.
Thank calls, we've received calls from psychics, ESP people, and in total what it's done is to bog down the machinery of the investigation so far.
How does it bog down?
We We can't afford to disregard any information. We have to follow up on many of the leads or the information that they give us. And if it is a crank call or crank information, it just ties up a man just that much longer.
A short while later, police knocked on Hinton's door while he was in the middle of instructing a course at the Pasadena Police Academy. They made a shocking discovery. Ronald had just purchased life insurance policies on each of his children. The first policy was for $10,000 for each child. This was purchased in January of that year. The second policy was for $20,000 for each child. This was purchased just 1 month prior to Halloween. Investigators delved deeper into Ronald Clark O'Bryan's history. They discovered that he was over $100,000 in debt. When police discovered that Ronald contacted his insurers to ask about the payout at 9 o'clock in the morning the day after Timothy's death, it was obvious that the case against him was beginning to come together, and come together fast. Police gained a warrant to search the O'Bryan home. A pair of scissors with a plastic residue attached was discovered during the search. The residue was very similar to what was discovered on the cyanide-laced candies. O'Bryan was detained for further investigation after being taken into custody. According to Hinton, as the inquiry progressed, there was more and more evidence that pointed in Ronald's direction. According to Hinton, it turned out that O'Bryan was going to community college, and in class he would ask his professors questions like, "What is more lethal, cyanide or another type of poison?" Hinton said, "Why would someone ask that?" Another witness came forward, someone who worked for a chemical firm in Houston. They provided information to the authorities about an individual who had gone elsewhere after being informed that the minimum quantity of cyanide that he could purchase was £5. The man from the store said he couldn't identify O'Bryan, but he remembered that his customer was wearing a beige or blue smock like a doctor, said Hinton. O'Bryan was an optician. That was exactly the uniform that he wore to work. However, because this occurred many years before DNA testing, CCTV, and electronically traceable banking, the authorities were unable to place the pixie sticks in Ronald's possession or to demonstrate that he had purchased any cyanide. Ronald Clark O'Bryan insisted that he was innocent, but prosecutors were sure that they could prove that he was guilty.
Against Ronald Clark O'Bryan, White Mill 30, West. At 11:50 p.m. on 11/4/74, a charge of murder by poisoning was filed against Ronald Clark O'Bryan, White Mill 30, of 746 West Parktown, Deer Park, Texas. When this first came to light, the community was horrified by the thought that someone had randomly poisoned a child. Now that there has been a dramatic turn of events in the case, it's perhaps no less consoling. Authorities charged the father with deliberately poisoning his son. Joe Allen, Eyewitness News.
Ronald Clark O'Bryan's trial began.
Most of today's testimony came from Jimmy Bates, a close friend of the O'Bryan family. Bates said that before Halloween, O'Bryan asked if he could bring his children over to trick-or-treat with the Bates children on Halloween night. Both families ate dinner together, and then the fathers took the children trick-or-treating. Bates said O'Bryan went to one house where no one appeared to be home, and after the children had scampered ahead to the next house, O'Bryan came off the front porch carrying the pixie sticks. He gave the pixie sticks to the children and then later took them back and said he wanted to stop at his car for a moment. Bates said when O'Bryan came back into the Bates house, he returned the pixie sticks to the children. Later that night, Timothy O'Bryan died from eating a poisoned pixie stick.
Hinton said, O'Bryan adored the attention. I think he even loved it during his trial. Ronald filed a not guilty plea, and his defense attributed the contaminated candy to an untraceable, unidentifiable boogeyman. This boogeyman was allegedly using Halloween as a cover to poison youngsters who were unaware that they were being targeted. However, members of Ronald's family, his friends and his co-workers all testified against the man that the media had dubbed the Candyman. On June 3rd, 1975, it took the jury only 46 minutes to reach a verdict of guilty. Guilty on 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. Ronald Clark O'Bryan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ronald was put to death by means of the electric chair. Nearly a decade had passed since a guilty verdict. Ronald Clark O'Bryan's potential appeals continue to be investigated and rejected. The United States Supreme Court decided that the electric chair was an example of cruel and unusual punishment. This means that Ronald would now be put to death by lethal injection. On March 31st, 1984, around 300 people gathered in Huntsville, Texas, in front of the Texas State Penitentiary to find out when the Candyman had been executed. As they waited, they yelled "trick or treat" and threw candy at penalty protesters. According to Reverend Carol Pickett, a former chaplain who worked for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, O'Bryan was shunned and despised by his fellow inmates for killing his child, and was absolutely friendless. Inside the prison, Ronald Clark O'Bryan made his final statement. What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. However, we as human beings do make mistakes and errors. This execution is one of those wrongs, yet doesn't mean our whole system of justice is wrong. Therefore, I would forgive all of those who have taken part in any way in my death. Also, to anyone I have offended in any way during my 39 years, I pray and ask for your forgiveness, just as I forgive anyone who offended me in any way. And I pray and ask for God's forgiveness for all of us respectively as human beings. To my loved ones, I extend my undying love. To those close to me, know in your hearts, I love you one and all. God bless you all, and may God's best blessings be always yours. Ronald C. O'Bryan. P.S. During my time here, I have been treated well by all TDC personnel. Do you think that Ronald Clark O'Bryan got the right punishment? Let me know in the comments. Please do make sure to like the video to boost the signal of this case. For more dark cases, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications now. The video catalogue is quickly growing, so do check out the channel page. Thank you to this month's patrons, David James, Shane Woodward, and Jason Deckard. For supporting me on Patreon, I will thank you at the end of each video produced during your time supporting me. Additionally, you will be credited in the video's description, and will gain access to Patreon DMs, which will give you priority case suggestions. It costs just £4 in UK money or your local equivalent. The support it will provide me and the channel will allow the continuation of my work. Thank you all, look after yourself, and I'll see you soon.